always want to make sure to clean before we start doing anything. The way that we clean, the order that we clean is we would work on the top, kind of closest to the HEPA filter and away. This one doesn't have light covers, so you're going to try to just do the metal part as much as you can.
Okay.
Now, the wipe that we use to clean the top of the hood has to be disposed of, because once you get to the farthest out in the hood itself, that's the dirtiest spot of the hood. Then we want to clean sidewalls one at a time, new wipe for each surface. Same thing with the IV pole.
So you throw away each time?
Each time, every single time. So essentially what we're doing is we're coming all the way forward. As soon as we come all the way forward, that is going to be the most contaminated space, and that should be thrown away. Exactly. So at a minimum, when you clean the hood, you want 5 wipes. One for the top, one for each sidewall, one for the IV pole, and one for the work surface. If you want to use more, it's perfectly fine. You just don't want less. Do you have a question?
No.
Okay. For drawing up from a vial. Now, once we've staged stuff inside the hood and we open anything, each individual vial is going to have its own alcohol swab. So we do not want to use a swab on multiple surfaces. So 1, 2 for 2 separate vials. Now, one of the things that a lot of people tend to do is they try to throw out waste every single time they're doing something. Now, anytime you leave the actual work environment and come out, we have to re-disinfect our hands with alcohol. So what I recommend is managing a small space of waste inside the hood that's out of the way of what we're working on. So if I'm working right here, this is not really going to affect me at all. So spray your hands before you start working, do a couple of procedures. Let's say we are drawing up, when you're recapping, if you do, so some places don't and do not allow it, if you do have to recap, always scoop the cap onto the needle. We don't want two moving objects, way too likely to stab ourselves in the hand. When we are opening any syringe, we always want to try to make sure to maintain first air to our critical site. So this is our critical site. If we open it and turn it here, this is bad.
Right.
If you notice that you do something like that, you're not going to get points out if you throw it away. If you keep it and then use it, that's when we have a problem, because this is potentially contaminated, right? So any chance that we can potentially contaminate something, we want to get rid of that if it's something that we can just change pretty easily. So if we bring this out of the hood, this is garbage. If we've kept it in here, kept it up in first air, when we open needles, you want to do essentially the same thing. Keep this maintained in first air. Hold down both sides so that this is clear. I see a lot of this. Try to avoid that. Try to make sure that you peel both sides back and attach it in first air. Now this is essentially a closed system. It's much easier to set down if you have to manage something else.
I got a question.
Yes.
You're calling first air as if we have vertical.
No, horizontal.
No,
Coming
This
this
is
way.
coming
Coming straight at my
Oh,
face.
but, okay.
No. Does that?
That's the
No,
type we
ask.
have.
Yeah,
That's the
that
type
makes
we have
sense,
here
yeah.
anyway.
So I'm just going to pretend that this is the HEPA filter.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
Now, I've heard,
Mhm.
although you have to bring the syringe and the needle in there,
Mhm.
because they are in a wrapper that is not any kind of way sterile on the outside.
Correct.
I've had to use my gloves to do this. Must I spray and wait after I have assembled that needle? Because now my hands have whatever.
So again, what we're doing is we're trying to manage our chances for contamination. All of these things are generally not sterile. So we don't want to do a bunch of manipulations without disinfecting our hands in between. It's next to impossible to maintain a 0 bacteria chance on our hands at all times. It's why when you are compounding, you are allowed up to 3 colonies on your fingertips. So if you are in the middle of compounding and I tell you to stop and touch a microplate, you're allowed up to 3 colonies on that plate. So again, while this stuff is not sterile, having it off to the side, understanding where the contamination can come from and how to manage it best is what we're trying to get you to do. So if you assemble, let's say we have to assemble multiple things. So I'm assembling another needle and syringe. Another needle and syringe. Now I'm going to start doing procedures. Well, I've kind of touched a bunch of wrappers, so I would probably take this all out of the hood, throw it away, disinfect my hands, and now I've got a cleaner work environment and my hands are cleaner than they were. So generally 3 to 4 manipulations you want to disinfect your hands. This was essentially 3. This together, but doing these 2 might have been 1. So that's roughly about where we would want to come out and disinfect again. Now when we're drawing up from a vial, we want to make sure that we are at least 5 mLs less than whatever we're drawing up. So if I'm taking out 20 mLs of air, or 20 mLs of water from here, I want 15 or less of air in my syringe. This way I can make sure to always maintain negative pressure. Here it's just sterile water, so it's not that big of a deal. Given any other drug, there's no long-term studies of what minute dosing of various drugs can actually do to you throughout a career of compounding, so we want to avoid exposure at all costs. If we start down at 20 and push that all in, we're under a situation where what is inside of our system wants to get out, and if my needle and my vial happen to slip apart, I'm going to spray. So we want to avoid that. To avoid that, we always start at least 5 mLs less than whatever we're drawing up. Now, if I've got my first air coming this way, you want to place the needle on the septum, have it vertical and slightly bowed, so it's just a little bit of pressure to the side. What that does is that allows the bevel to be straight up and down. When the bevel's straight up and down, it's going to core much less on the top, or have much less of a chance of coring of that septum. So you're here straight up and down, and just a little bit of pressure, so you see that the bevel is vertical. So
It was
here,
vertical before you.
no, so the bevel is that opening, right?
Right.
So right here, that bevel is like this. If I put a little bit of pressure, the bevel becomes straight up and down. When the bevel's straight up and down, you enter, yes. When the bevel's straight up and down, you can enter and release that pressure immediately.
But I thought you're supposed to kind of put it in and bow it. That's what the book said.
So bowing is when we have this like this. So it's just a little bit of pressure. The needle is bowed.
The very tip.
So the very tip is what we're looking for, that bevel. We want that to be straight up and down.
Okay.
So once it's straight up and down, you enter. This reduces the amount of coring that we get in the top. Less chance of cutting a small hole. Now, once you have this in, you want to orient it so that the liquid will come down, and we want to make sure to maintain first air to our junction point. So where our needle and our septum are touching, we want to always maintain in first air. If I hold it like this, I am blocking first air to that point. We have to have some way to make sure that our hand is oriented that will allow first air to be maintained to this junction point. Whatever winds up being comfortable for you. Everybody's hands work differently. This, after practice, has worked best for me. Kind of just having it in a V grip. Once you're ready to draw out, just pull back, and then allow the negative pressure that we have generated inside the vial to take the liquid, to take the air inside of the vial. So it's essentially a seesaw where we pull out some liquid, and then we let the vial take in the air. This way we're not creating a positive pressure system. If these two come apart, we don't have a leak. If, however, I enter the vial and create positive pressure, as this comes down, let's say these happen to come apart, there will be a leak, which we want to avoid. Any sort of leak can contaminate us. Now, once we draw down to our final dose, clear your bubbles. We'll pretend that I don't have any of that leak anywhere. Whenever you tap on a syringe, you're going to splash liquid up onto the needle hub. So we want to avoid pushing up after tapping, right? So even though there's air here, liquid still came out because I had tapped and splashed the hub. So always after you tap, make sure you pull back. Then you can usually adjust out your air because you won't have that leak. Now, I'm going to be reconstituting this powder. this I want to maintain in first air, so you can either set it down, set it up, recap it and set it down, as long as first air that's coming over our needle is maintained. Disinfect this surface. Make sure you let it dry. Usually it's about 5 seconds. Once the alcohol is dry, it can enter the same way that we entered the water. In order to maintain our negative pressure, we want to pull back and allow the liquid to flow in. As that liquid flows in, we can rotate the vial, getting the powder to fall onto the liquid, and it'll dissolve much more readily. If we orient it like this and kind of just get the liquid in fast, when that cake is on the bottom, you're just going to have one layer of particles that's getting wet, and it takes forever to dissolve. So one of the best ways is kind of to orient it sideways, let the liquid come in the first couple of times. Once you have some in there, you can kind of just orient it here and get it in quick. Now, you may see me pushing down. It's perfectly acceptable as long as we don't go past where we started. So I started right around 20 mLs. So I do not want to push past 20 mLs because that creates the positive pressure that we don't want. So I want to make sure to maintain that negative pressure so I can just kind of rush it to where I started to get the rest of the liquid in. And once we're reconstituted, make sure you're behind where you started and remove. You hear that? It's like it's wanting air, so it's sucking in. It's not going to be pressing out on you. 4 dispensing pins. Open our vial, clean it the same way. This is a closed system. Once we remove this, this is open and this can be contaminated. Or we remove this, this is open and can be contaminated. So we want to make sure that whenever we're using this, it's essentially always closed. Open, insert. Now if I'm going to draw something up, when you remove the dispensing pin cap, we want to make sure that this is maintained in first air. We don't want this to be upside down or rolling around or with our trash. This is a critical site, just like this is a critical site. Both want to be maintained in first air. Now I have a syringe, I've either just opened it or removed a needle. Always make sure to maintain it in first air. You can attach these, invert, draw down. So let's say I'm taking out 10 mLs. I'm going to draw down to a little bit more than half my dose, get rid of my air, and then draw the rest of the way. Dispensing pins, while they're very much easier to use, you don't have to worry about that negative pressure. If you go past your dose, if you come too much past and then have to re-push it in, it will not always adjust for you. So you see how it pushed it back down when I tried to get up to 10?
Push it back.
Right. So like they're while they operate well and they help relieve pressure, it's not perfect. So we have to make sure to always draw up about half of your dose, then clear your air bubbles, then draw down to the rest of your dose. Once you're at your final dose, so now we'll pretend that I was going to 15. Orient it sideways, unscrew, tip both up. You can attach a needle to the syringe. Now this is a closed system. This can be set down. And then we want to close this system so that we don't potentially contaminate here. Does anybody have any questions on those? If you can do all of this correctly, you will have no issue inside. One thing to note is when you're breaking open the ampule, you want to make sure that your needle and syringe are assembled and ready to go before breaking it open. So the opening of the ampule is the largest opening that we have to contamination, and if we have to tear paper, open needles, or open syringes, we're generating extra particulate that we want to try to avoid getting into our ampule. If it has any contamination on it, we could potentially contaminate our end solution. We do not want to break the ampule open with an alcohol swab because we could potentially get alcohol into the solution. Okay?
Okay. Initially, when you started, what was the importance of lining up the
So
surface of those things?
our first air is coming from this side. So if we have vials that are too close together, air that's going to come this way is going to hit and spin behind the vials. That air that's spinning back here has the potential to deposit on a vial next to it. So what we want is we want to make sure that we have ample space between everything so that when we are working, we don't potentially cross-contaminate. So we always want to make sure that we have stuff set up. Now, this is perfectly acceptable as well because we have enough space between everything.
Okay. So, in the alternative to this, can we use alcohol?
Like a spray?
Alcohol
So
spray?
the main issue that I have with alcohol spray is that you're not completely clearing the surface. So what this does is it wipes potentially anything that's away and gets alcohol on it. So if there is a contaminant on there, this will remove it as opposed to just kind of spraying spots. Now, when you do spray, you get a ton of little spots as opposed to a nice smooth alcohol covering. So while spraying alcohol does help disinfect overall, it's a lot of little dots as opposed to a nice covering of everything.
So do
That's
we
interesting.
detect the code takes how long?
About an hour.
Okay. So that means 1 hour, 12 hours.
Correct.
Okay. Which means since I have my meeting at 11, you probably won't have to go first. By the time we're done with that.